Blessed be, and amen. So as we return from our meditation, I'm curious how many people were able to go to a climate strike on Friday or Saturday. So a few of us. I'll be honest, I felt like such a rotten ally on climate change to miss it. It felt unministerial not to be at an event. But I'm pretty sure that walking out on a memorial service that I'm conducting would be worse. So I think I made the right decision. But I am grateful that the momentum is continuing, because we are living in a moment that will define our trajectory, whether we like it or not. And this movement is coming from our youth. And even though I actually shouldn't be surprised that our youth are wiser than we are, I'm still in awe. These strikes were organized by 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, who just sailed all the way from Sweden in an emission-free sailboat. It took her over 2 weeks to make the incredible journey. And then she led a strike in New York City and testified before Congress. And I watched this 16-year-old field attacks from congressmen, theoretically adults, only to speak with more clarity, conviction, and intelligence than any of them. She defies expectations. And truth be told, I feel a little embarrassed that a teenager is accomplishing more than I am, because I spent a decade getting an education with the whole aspiration of changing the world. And here I am now at 35 saying, I'm ready. But that's on me, isn't it? And as amazing as Greta is, she's not doing this alone. Youth all over the world are leading the way. And it leads me to wonder, why are youth so much more attuned to our reality? Why don't they seem to have the same emotional hang-ups that adults do? Even adults who intellectually understand just how real climate change is, which I'm going to guess includes just about everybody in this room, they don't seem to resist living like the earth is dying. And yes, it's their future that we're destroying, but it's my daughter's future too, and mine. So I don't believe it just comes from a survival instinct. Youth and young adults seem to actually be better equipped emotionally to navigate climate change. Is it just growing up in climate disaster, or is there actually a cultural difference? And obviously, I find climate change deniers to be equally puzzling, although far more infuriating. White evangelical Christians are the most likely group to question climate change. And I just don't get it. I find it odd that so many people who adamantly believe the apocalypse will come don't seem to see climate change in those terms. But maybe that's actually part of it. Because most people have an opinion, or at least an association, with the idea of an apocalypse. It's been a part of religious communities for millennia. Jewish and Christian scriptures are full of apocalyptic predictions. End-time stories are almost as common as origin stories across religious traditions. So shouldn't that be a source of understanding rather than resistance? Well, I think it's a source of resistance because in most of these stories, the apocalypse is a single event. It's a moment where the official end is triggered. But we're not looking at a single event. We're looking at the potential for progressive and terrifying descent into chaos, destabilization, and mass extinctions. And one of the interesting cultural differences between the younger generation and the rest of us is that most of them have been more influenced by zombie apocalypse stories than biblical ones. There are movies, board games, and video games all about apocalypses. And let me tell you, they look very different than the one in Revelations. I play those games, but being a minister, I'm a little bit more influenced by my Judeo-Christian education. But one of the underlying themes in these zombie-infested universes is that apocalypse never happens overnight. It's a process. It's tedious, and it's terrifying. And almost always a product of human greed. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? So not only is it easier for youth to recognize the reality of climate change, but these games and movies have actually helped to simulate emotional resilience and teach action in the face of fear. But perhaps most importantly, these games teach human agency. Whereas humans are passive in a religious apocalypse, in the stories that have been told in the last 30 years, humans are the actors in it. We tell the story and we decide the future, for better or for worse. In some ways, it'd be easier if we didn't. We could simply be devastated and frustrated. We could be paralyzed and it wouldn't matter. But it does matter. And paralysis now makes a bad decision for us. It makes sense for us to be in denial. It makes sense to be angry. It makes sense to be depressed and to just pray that there's a way out. It's called grief. And grief is to be expected in this moment in time. But in some ways, the grief process is misplaced because it implies that there's nothing we can do and that we simply have to land on acceptance. But grief can be a gift in this moment too. Because on the other side of grief, once we've returned to our sense of agency, is creation. It is the powerful place where we are most creative and most powerful. I've seen how people respond to communal trauma, and it reminds us that there is beauty in the world. In 2017, when the wildfires in Sonoma were raging, temporary shelters just popped up out of nowhere. It turned out to be people who had attended Burning Man the festival with all of their camping supplies. They actually had started doing this in 2005 during Hurricane Katrina. And since then, they continue to mobilize their camping supplies when there's a natural disaster. That is community. Strangers showing up for strangers. It's taking grief, taking sorrow, and transforming it into creative solutions. The natural instinct in a disaster is to empathize, to know that we are interdependent. Even as the flames were blinding, Lynn Powell went back for her dog during the Sonoma fire, and the fire took her life. And this is a disaster that I do believe can either completely and utterly tear us apart or completely and utterly bring us together. It is incumbent upon us to spread creative goodness, to love the neighbor we've never met and come to their aid in crisis, to live lives that sacrifice our own comforts in the interest of keeping our beloved siblings alive, to replace greed with compassion and care, to fight the fossil fuel industry and force cleaner energy to be prioritized, to hold the powerful accountable by using the power of the people. That is the power of transformative grief in long-term trauma. We are called to simultaneously dismantle the forces working to decimate our planet and to create a force that rebuilds, elevates, and supports. We need the vision of care just as much as the vision of protest and anger. And that to me is a signal of hope, because I know we are capable of care if we will allow the memories of devastations past, the people that we've lost, and the stories of human kindness to teach us how to embody unity. We may need to bring a little hell to the powerful, but we've got to build heaven too. So join me, friends. Get inspired. Get angry. Feel your grief. Feel whatever it is that you need to feel to join Greta and our youth in transforming this world for the better. Now let's get to work. Blessed be, and amen.